Imagine the pain of seeing your child taken away from you, while the system seems to close all doors. For years, he fought unfair accusations, faced hearings that seemed never-ending, and saw his relationship with his son torn apart. But what happens when a father, driven by unconditional love, decides not to give up? Get ready to discover what he did to finally win custody of his son, and how, amidst so much adversity, he found the strength to overcome the impossible. You'll be surprised by the outcome of this seemingly endless struggle. Life can be unpredictable. In an instant, you have a family, happiness by your side, and a routine that seems perfect. But in another moment, that reality is abruptly shattered. This was the case for a father who, like many others, found his world turned upside down when he separated from his son's mother. What seemed like a new beginning for both of them soon became one of the hardest battles of his life, the fight for custody of his son. This father, like many of us, never imagined he would face such a challenging situation. The separation wasn't easy, and although his love for his son remained strong, the circumstances quickly presented an immense obstacle. What he didn't know in that moment of farewell and pain was that this separation would transform into a constant struggle to be with his son. The desire to ensure that his child had the life he always dreamed for him was what drove him to never give up, no matter how difficult it got. After the separation, challenges began to arise. They were not only emotional, but also legal, financial, and psychological. The father felt, from the first days, that something was wrong. His relationship with the mother of his child, which had seemed amicable at first, soon turned into a bitter dispute. The father, who had always believed that love and dedication to his child would be enough to secure his role as a father, quickly found himself facing a series of challenges, forced to delve into a legal system that often didn't understand the depth of his paternal bond. In the first few months after the separation, the father encountered early signs that gaining custody of his child would be an uphill battle. Conversations with the mother became tense, full of accusations and misunderstandings. He tried in every way possible to keep communication open, thinking of what was best for his son, but soon realized that personal interests began to overshadow the needs of the child. His relationship with his son began to be affected by all of this, by the constant legal clashes and emotional strain. Even though he was a devoted father, he felt as if he were losing the bond with his child, as though his role as a father was being constantly undermined. This began to erode his confidence and his hope. It was then that he realized he needed to act. The fight for custody was no longer just about a piece of paper that recognized his fatherhood. It was about ensuring that his son had the best possible environment, with the love and presence of both parents. His son needed him, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. The separation had brought out both the worst and the best in his journey as a father. And in the face of that, he knew he had to do whatever it took to make sure his son grew up with the stability he deserved. But this decision wasn't easy. The legal system, rather than helping, seemed to be an even greater barrier. False accusations, documents, hearings. It all began to feel like an endless game of trials and errors. He soon understood that, to fight for his son, he had to prepare for a war that went beyond legalities. The emotional toll was immense, and sleepless nights spent worrying about the consequences for his son became common. Every step in the courtroom felt like a step toward frustration. Yet, he knew he couldn't retreat. He knew he couldn't lose the chance to give his son the opportunity to have the life they both deserved. At first, he didn't know where to begin. The first signs that he would need legal help were clear, but not enough. It was more than just hiring a lawyer. He needed a strategy, to be mentally prepared, and above all, to never give up. The pain of seeing his son from afar, influenced by a situation in which he had no control, was devastating. Yet it was also the strength that pushed him to keep going, because he knew his son deserved something more, something better, something he was capable of providing. It was in this moment of pain and frustration that the need to fight for custody became an obsession. He realized that this struggle was not just legal. It was a mission in life. A mission for fatherhood, for justice, for the love he felt for his son. The journey had just begun, but the determination to do whatever was necessary to reach this goal only grew stronger with each passing day. What this father went through was a true trial, but it was also a demonstration of strength, love, and resilience. In the end, he learned that no matter the difficulties, the fight for a child's love should never be abandoned. If justice needs to be sought, it must be won with courage, perseverance, and above all, with the desire to provide the best future possible for the child. And you? What would you do in a situation like this? This is a story that many fathers face every day, but that few truly understand. So, if you connected with this struggle and want to know how this story unfolded, don't miss out. Let's explore together every step of this journey and see how, in the end, love and perseverance can overcome the most difficult moments. When a father decides to fight for custody of his child after a separation, he is not only entering a legal dispute, but stepping into a turbulent field where legal obstacles, accusations, and false narratives often intertwine, making the journey even more difficult and exhausting. The separation, which often seems like the end of a relationship, is actually just the beginning of a long battle. For this father, the fight for custody of his son became more than just a legal dispute. It became a difficult road full of challenges he never imagined he would face. It all began with the separation. At first, the negotiations seemed simple. Like many couples facing the end of a relationship, there was hope for an amicable solution. But quickly, things took an unexpected turn. What should have been a transition into a new life soon turned into an emotional and legal war. The mother of his child, initially receptive to an amicable arrangement, started to become more resistant to his attempts to ensure time with the child. The father, who once believed that love and devotion would be enough to guarantee his role as a father, soon found himself facing a series of challenges, forced to dive into a legal system that often didn't understand the depth of his paternal bond. From the first days after the separation, the father faced the first signs that gaining custody of his son would be an uphill battle. Conversations with the mother turned tense, full of accusations and misunderstandings. He tried in every possible way to keep communication open, thinking of what was best for his son, but soon realized that personal interests began to take precedence over the child's needs. His relationship with his son began to be affected by all of this, by the constant legal conflicts and emotional strain. Even though he was a dedicated father, he felt as though he was losing the bond with his child, as if his role as a father was being constantly undermined. This slowly eroded his confidence and his hope, and that's when he realized he needed to act. The fight for custody was no longer just about a piece of paper that recognized his fatherhood. It was about ensuring that his son had the best possible environment, with the love and presence of both parents. His son needed him, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. The separation had brought out the worst and the best of his journey as a father, and in the face of that, he knew he had to do whatever it took to make sure his son grew up with the stability he deserved. But this decision wasn't easy. The legal system, rather than helping, seemed to present an even greater barrier. False accusations, documents, hearings. It all started to feel like an endless cycle of attempts and failures. He soon understood that to fight for his son, he would have to prepare for a battle that extended beyond legalities. The emotional toll was immense, and sleepless nights spent worrying about the consequences for his son became routine. Every step in the courtroom seemed like another step toward frustration. Yet, he knew he couldn't retreat. He knew he couldn't lose the chance to give his son the life they both deserved. At first, he didn't know where to begin. The first signs that he would need legal help were clear, but not enough. It was more than just hiring a lawyer. He needed a strategy, to be mentally prepared, and above all, to never give up. The pain of seeing his son from afar, influenced by a situation in which he had no control, was devastating. But it was also the strength that pushed him to keep going, because he knew his son deserved something more, something better, something he was capable of providing. It was in this moment of pain and frustration that the need to fight for custody became an obsession. He realized that this struggle was not just legal. It was a mission in life. A mission for fatherhood, for justice, for the love he felt for his son. The journey had just begun, but the determination to do whatever was necessary to reach this goal only grew stronger with each passing day. What this father went through was a true trial, but it was also a demonstration of strength, love, and resilience. In the end, he learned that no matter the difficulties, the fight for a child's love should never be abandoned. If justice needs to be sought, it must be won with courage, perseverance, and above all, with the desire to provide the best future possible for the child. The court hearings are moments charged with tension, uncertainty, and often deep frustration. For the father, with every hearing, hope seemed to diminish a little more, while feelings of helplessness grew stronger. The system that should have guaranteed justice often felt indifferent to his fight, and what was once an attempt to resolve the situation amicably soon turned into a battlefield. Every time he sat in the witness stand, looked at the judge, the lawyers, and the mother of his child, he felt a mixture of anxiety and hopelessness. The unfounded accusations, made in an attempt to undermine his image as a devoted father, were treated as if they were undeniable truths. The mother's lawyers, with their well-prepared strategies, threw words and accusations that seemed to distort the entire reality of his relationship with the child. And as if that weren't enough, he found himself in front of a court system that, instead of focusing on what truly mattered, the well-being of his child, seemed more focused on legal arguments that did little to reflect the reality of fatherhood. It was as if the system was treating the situation as a matter of paperwork and bureaucracy, rather than seeing the depth of the bond between father and son. With every hearing, the father felt like his words, his emotions, everything he had done to be a good parent, had little weight compared to the coldness of the legal system. He was no longer just fighting to win the case, but to show the court that he was the best option to raise his child. Each session seemed like another reminder that despite his love and devotion, he was being disregarded. The emotional impact of the hearings. With every new hearing, the father's frustration deepened. This battle wasn't just about legal arguments. It was also about his emotions and his heart. He wasn't just there to fight for custody of a child. He was there to ensure his child had the opportunity to grow up with both parents' love and care. Every time he looked at the mother, he saw the determination to tear him down. Every accusation of neglect or insensitivity, even without evidence, felt like a sharp blade cutting away at the trust he had in the process. How could he fight something so strong, so cruelly manipulated? In many hearings, the atmosphere seemed to get colder and more impersonal. The courtroom was an environment where the human element often got lost. The judge, despite his impartiality, couldn't understand the emotional complexity behind every word spoken. The father, then, found himself in a position of disadvantage. Instead of focusing on what mattered most, the love of a father for his child, the court seemed to be more concerned with the technicalities of the law, with who could argue better, not who could provide the best future for the child. The hardest part was trying to understand how something so essential, his love for his son, could be dismissed in a process that was meant to protect the child's well-being. He felt that he was up against not just the mother, but a system that, more often than not, didn't seem to understand the real meaning of fatherhood. How could he fight that? The more he fought, the more it felt like the process was doing more harm than good. Coping with the feeling of being constantly disregarded. The father, in his struggle, was faced with one of the hardest challenges of his life. How do you cope with the feeling of being constantly disregarded? How do you hold on to your dignity when everything you do seems to be dismissed? The emotional toll was heavy, and the constant cycle of accusations and slow-moving decisions left him feeling defeated. The battle was no longer just about winning. It was about proving that his love for his son was real and that he deserved the opportunity to be the father his child needed. In many moments, he found himself questioning whether all of this was worth it. Every time the mother made another accusation, and the court seemed to favor her side, the father felt more and more helpless. The weight of the legal process, the coldness of the court, and the emotional manipulation from the other side started to break him down. At times he considered giving up, wondering if he'd ever get through this. But through all the emotional exhaustion, there were moments when he realized that giving up wasn't an option. His love for his son was far stronger than the system's indifference. He had to find a way to persevere, even when everything around him seemed to suggest that he couldn't win. There were times when it felt like all hope was lost, but in those moments of despair, he remembered why he was fighting in the first place: his child. And in those quiet moments between hearings, when he thought about his son's smile and the bond they shared, he found the strength to keep going. His determination was no longer just for himself. It was for the child who needed him, for the child who depended on him to be there no matter what. If this part of the story moved you, be sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe to stay tuned for the next chapter in this emotional journey. A journey like this, filled with legal battles, accusations, and emotional turmoil, tests a person's limits in ways few can understand. But for this father, what kept him going, what allowed him to keep fighting even when everything seemed hopeless, was the love he had for his son. In the darkest of moments, when the legal process felt like it was never going to end, when the system seemed to be working against him, his love for his child became the driving force that kept him in the fight. From the beginning of this battle, the father knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. The hearings, the accusations, and the constant feeling of being undermined emotionally and legally were draining. But each time he thought about giving up, he was reminded of what was at stake: his child's future, their relationship, and the life he wanted to build with his son. In those early days, after each frustrating court session, he felt his hope slipping away. It seemed like the more he tried to prove himself as a capable, loving father, the harder it became. The mother's accusations weighed heavily on him, and the slow pace of the judicial system made it feel like the end was always just out of reach. But despite all of this, the father kept going. He kept fighting, not for himself, but for his son. He knew that no matter how hard it got, giving up was not an option. There were countless moments when the father felt like giving up. After each emotionally draining hearing, when accusations from the mother seemed to hold more weight than his efforts, the father would question everything. Why was he fighting? What was the point of all the heartache and frustration? Each hearing felt like a step backward, and the process seemed endless. In one of the most difficult hearings, he looked around the courtroom and thought, "Is this really worth it? Am I really going to make it through this?" The toll on his body and mind was overwhelming, and for a brief moment, he wondered if walking away was the best thing to do, for both him and his son. But it was in these moments of despair that the true depth of his determination began to shine through. He realized that his love for his son, the bond they shared, was far stronger than the obstacles standing in his way. The child he had cared for, raised, and loved deserved better than to be caught in the middle of an endless battle. And the father knew that no matter how many times he was knocked down, he had to keep getting up. One night, after a particularly grueling hearing, the father sat alone, exhausted and overwhelmed. As he looked at a picture of his son, smiling and happy, he reminded himself of the promise he had made when his child was born, that he would always be there. And no matter how hard the journey was, no matter how long it took, he would never stop fighting to fulfill that promise. As time went on, the father's perseverance began to evolve. He stopped seeing every setback as a failure and started viewing each hurdle as an opportunity to push forward. He began to understand that the road to victory wasn't always going to be a straight line. It would be filled with challenges. But the key to winning was to never stop moving forward. Every hearing, Every piece of evidence, every conversation with his lawyer was part of the larger picture. A picture of a father determined to do whatever it took to be with his son. The father became more strategic. He sought out legal advice, did research, and even took time to better understand the emotional and psychological impact of custody battles. He realized that to win, he needed not only the best legal representation, but also to be in the right emotional state to fight for what he knew was best for his child. Every challenge, instead of weakening him, made him more determined to prove that he was the father his son needed and deserved. There was a moment in one of the hearings when the father felt a surge of clarity. It wasn't just about fighting against the system or the mother. It was about what his child needed. His son needed him, and that realization made everything else seem less important. The father understood that the best way to fight was not just by winning in court, but by showing his son, through every action, that his love was unwavering and that he would always be there. With every passing day, the father's determination grew. The more obstacles he faced, the more determined he became. He was no longer just a man fighting for his rights. He was a father fighting for the most important person in his life. Each time the legal system tried to break him, he found strength in his love for his son. The more he fought, the more he realized that the strength he needed wasn't just in his legal arguments. It was in his unwavering commitment to his son. This battle wasn't just about winning. It was about showing his son that he would never give up on him. The father's perseverance became a symbol of his love and his dedication. And while the road ahead was still uncertain, he knew that no matter what, he would continue fighting, not just for the custody of his son, but for their future together. When someone is in a battle as difficult and emotionally draining as a custody fight, the weight of isolation can often be overwhelming. No matter how determined a person is, the emotional and legal pressure can begin to crumble even the strongest hearts. It was in these moments of profound need that the father, throughout his journey, discovered something fundamental to his survival: the unwavering support of friends and family. The father, who had found himself isolated in many situations throughout the process, began to realize that despite the pain, he was not alone. The help he received from his friends and family was not merely words of encouragement, but tangible actions that held him up when he needed it most. When he felt like giving up, these people became the pillars that helped him keep going, offering strength, emotional support, and even financial resources to help him face the harsh reality of the legal process. The first source of support he found was within his own family. His mother, who had always been a strong presence in his life, became his greatest advocate. Throughout the long weeks and months of hearings, she was there for him, offering not just words of encouragement but practical advice on how to handle the stress and pressure. She knew how much the situation was affecting her son, and while it hurt her to see him go through this, she understood the importance of helping him push forward. Her constant presence in the hearings, always ready to hold him up in moments of despair, became one of the greatest forces for him to keep going. His father, on the other hand, became the rational pillar, someone who offered perspective on the fact that the fight needed to be fought with intelligence, not just emotion. He was always there, ready to listen to his son's concerns and advise him on how to act in moments of crisis. But perhaps the most crucial support came from his sister, who, noticing the toll it was taking on her brother, took it upon herself to be his constant motivator. She, who knew how much he loved his son, helped him stay focused on the bigger goal: his child's well-being. In some of the most difficult hearings, where the father felt emotionally drained, his sister was by his side, not just as emotional support, but also as an advocate. She helped organize the documents, review the evidence, and even plan the strategy for the next steps. She also organized meetings with expert lawyers, offering a network of support that he didn't even realize he had. She would always say, "No matter how hard it gets, you're stronger than you think, and you're not alone." While family was his emotional anchor, friends also played a crucial role. Longtime friends, who knew the depth of his character and the dedication he had always shown to being a father, were there to remind him of his strength when he was about to succumb to despair. Many nights, after an especially draining hearing, he would find himself in deep conversations with friends, sharing his frustration and pain. They were the shoulders on which he could cry, but also the ones who pulled him back to reality, telling him, "You have to keep going. Your son needs you. This fight is worth it." One close friend, who was also going through a difficult divorce, was particularly important to him. He understood the pain of losing something as precious as daily time with your children. This friend, who had already faced many challenges, offered practical advice on how to deal with the legal process and the constant frustration of seeing the hearings drag on for so long. He reminded the father that the most important thing was not immediate victory in the courtroom, but consistency and commitment to what was best for his child. On some days when the father felt utterly exhausted, a friend suggested he take breaks and step back from the process to care for his mental health. He encouraged him to do simple activities that helped him relax, like walking or even playing soccer, something the father loved and which helped him relieve stress. This was vital, so that he wouldn't succumb to emotional exhaustion and would continue to fight with renewed energy and clarity. Along the way, friends and family were also essential in celebrating the small victories, which were often overlooked by the court. Every step forward, every favorable decision, even if small, was celebrated with enthusiasm. The father's sister, for instance, threw a small party when he achieved an important victory in one of the hearings, something that might have seemed insignificant to others, but was a massive triumph for him. These moments of celebration were essential in keeping his motivation high, reminding him that the battle wasn't in vain. In one of the most difficult hearings, when it seemed like all legal options had been exhausted and things were taking an unfavorable turn for him, it was the support of his friends that made all the difference. They were there to listen to him, to remind him of his strength, and to encourage him. Without this constant support, he might have lost faith in his ability to see this through. They helped keep his motivation going, not with empty promises, but with concrete actions and sincere words of encouragement. But perhaps the most significant support came from his best friend, who not only encouraged him throughout the hearings, but also actively helped him in practical ways. This friend knew the father was struggling financially with the costs of the legal process, so he offered to help fund some of the expenses. He was also present during meetings with lawyers, helping review documents and even helping find specialists who could strengthen the case. This friend wasn't just there to listen. He became a true ally in the battle for custody. With the support of his friends and family, the father not only found the strength to keep going, but also realized that he didn't have to carry the burden of the fight alone. While the legal battle was personal, the ongoing support from those around him gave him the energy to continue. This network of solidarity was what kept his hope alive, reminding him that no matter the obstacles, he had a group of people who were ready to support him and fight by his side. If this story of support and perseverance touched your heart, be sure to leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one. After months of hearings, false accusations, and an emotionally draining battle, the father began to lose faith in the legal process. Every new obstacle seemed to confirm his feelings of helplessness, and the hopes for a favorable resolution seemed further and further away. He knew the fight for custody of his son was going to be a long one, but by this point, he was physically and emotionally drained. The sleepless nights, the constant stress, and the pain of being separated from his son were taking a heavy toll. But, as it often happens in stories of overcoming, there is a crucial moment when everything starts to change. This turning point in the legal process was unexpected, a twist that brought a wave of renewed hope, making him believe once again that victory was possible. It was a pivotal moment that gave the father the strength he needed to keep fighting, even in the face of so many obstacles. What seemed like an endless battle suddenly shifted when, during a meeting with his lawyer, a new piece of evidence came to light. Throughout the process, the father had done everything he could to prepare, collecting records of visits, proving his involvement in his son's life, gathering testimonies from friends and family. But there was one detail he hadn't considered: a record of a specific event, a recorded conversation where the mother, in a moment of frustration, admitted that, in fact, he had been the most present parent in the child's life. This recording, uncovered during a more thorough investigation, was the key to the turnaround. The conversation had been captured during an argument the mother had with a close friend, where, in her frustration, she admitted that the father had always been more present in the child's life than she was. This admission could change everything. The lawyer, reviewing the recording, immediately saw the importance of this evidence and knew it could make all the difference in how the judge viewed the case. Hearing this, the father couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and disbelief. He knew that this evidence not only backed up his story, but also dismantled the narrative that had been built by the mother, which painted him as an absent and incapable father. The recording became a decisive turning point that shifted the dynamic of the custody battle. With the new evidence in hand, the father's lawyer quickly met with him to discuss how this proof would be incorporated into the case. The lawyer, experienced and reliable, knew that this was the opportunity they had been waiting for to turn the tide in the father's favor. He worked strategically, preparing a strong presentation for the court, based on the recording and all the other evidence the father had already gathered. With each step, the lawyer seemed more confident, which was a relief for the father, who had been struggling with uncertainty up to that point. In addition, the lawyer suggested conducting a new psychological evaluation, both for the father and for the mother, to ensure that the final decision took into account the emotional environment the child was living in. The lawyer understood that the child was being affected by the constant tension between the parents, and this evaluation could offer a clearer picture of who was truly in the best position to provide a stable environment for the child. The change in legal strategy was crucial. Now, not only were the pieces of evidence the father had gathered stronger, but the lawyer's approach to challenge the mother's accusations was more aggressive, more focused on seeking the truth and the child's well-being. This shift in tactics was a game-changer, and the father began to feel, for the first time in a while, that he actually had a real chance to gain custody of his son. The real turning point came during a critical hearing, when the judge, upon hearing the new evidence and considering the change in the legal strategy, began to question the narrative that had been constructed by the mother. She had made several serious accusations against the father, which appeared to be based more on personal resentments than on any real evidence. But the recording, which clearly showed the mother admitting the father's involvement, shed new light on the situation. The judge, realizing that the mother was attempting to manipulate the truth, started to reconsider the evidence presented. For the first time, the father felt like the court was beginning to see the situation from a new perspective, not as a dispute between two parties, but as a fight for the well-being of the child. And at that moment, the judge suggested that an alternative solution be considered. He proposed that a co-parenting evaluation be done, where the father would spend more time with his son, while the mother would also have the opportunity to demonstrate her parenting abilities. This suggestion from the judge was a clear sign that the tide was turning in the father's favor. He knew that this evaluation would be his chance to show, in a concrete way, that he could provide a stable and loving environment for his child. Hearing the judge's proposal, a wave of relief washed over him. He felt like, finally, he was being heard. The change in the case didn't mean that the fight was over. There was still a long road ahead, but the father now had something that had been missing for so long: renewed hope. He knew that the change in the process didn't mean that everything would be easy from here on out, but he was confident that finally, the system was starting to see what he had always known: that a father's love shouldn't be questioned, and that his son deserved to have both parents in his life. The new legal strategy, the crucial evidence, and the renewed support from everyone around him gave him the confidence to keep going. The fight for custody, which had seemed impossible, now felt like a battle he was destined to win. He had overcome adversity, false accusations, and immense frustration, and now he was, once again, with the chance to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was the best person to care for his son. The battle for custody of a child goes beyond the courtroom. It profoundly affects family relationships, especially between father and son. For this father, the judicial struggle wasn't just about legal matters or the need to win a case. Every hearing, every day of separation, every moment he couldn't see his son affected the way he connected with the child and the bond they had built over the years. In the first months of the battle, the father noticed a distancing that he wasn't prepared for. The time they used to spend together, laughing, talking, sharing daily routines, began to slowly disappear, replaced by a series of supervised visits and brief, often cold exchanges. Each visit felt like another reminder of everything he was losing, and at the same time, a reason to never give up. He knew that the love he had for his son was unconditional, but the system was testing that love, putting him in a position where both physical and emotional distance seemed almost insurmountable. The father and son's relationship began to be shaped by uncertainty. The supervised visits, which at first seemed like a temporary solution, became the only way they could connect. These encounters, which used to be spontaneous and natural, were now controlled by rules that felt colder and colder. The father could feel the pain of seeing his son's smile fading, as if he was becoming just a distant figure in the child's life. He felt that every word spoken, every gesture of affection, was being constantly mediated, which made him question just how far he could restore the connection they once had. The emotional impact of the custody battle began to show not only in the time the father and son spent together, but also in how they communicated. In many moments, the father noticed that his son, in his innocence, was starting to emotionally withdraw. While the love was always evident in his eyes, the father began to notice small changes in his son's behavior. He no longer ran to hug him as before, and their conversations, once filled with enthusiasm and laughter, were becoming more silent. This distancing, although painful, was something the father tried to understand, knowing that his son was absorbing the tension from the battle. The child, even without fully understanding what was going on, knew that something was wrong. He could feel the heavy atmosphere, and, like any child, began to protect himself from a situation he couldn't comprehend. The father knew this was one of the hardest parts, seeing his son suffer the consequences of something he hadn't caused. This reality made him even more determined to continue the fight because he understood that the solution wasn't simply to win the case, but to restore the genuine bond between them. Despite the challenges, there were precious moments that showed the true strength of the bond between father and son. In one of the supervised visits, when the father arrived at the meeting spot, his son, although looking a bit more reserved, immediately ran toward him. This simple gesture, a tight hug, and genuine laughter, was a powerful reminder that, no matter how much the process was pulling them apart, the love was still there, strong and real. On another occasion, while they were together in a park during a visit, the father sat on a bench and watched his son play nearby. He noticed how the boy tried to focus on his games, but at the same time kept looking over at him, as if seeking reassurance that he was still there. For a few minutes, the son stopped playing and simply leaned on his father without saying a word. The father felt a lump in his throat, but also a deep sense of relief. It was as if, for a brief moment, time had stopped, and all that mattered was their presence together. On other days, when the father was about to leave for another hearing, his son, with a curious and somewhat worried look, asked, "Daddy, are you coming back soon?" Those words, spoken simply, made the father reflect deeply on the impact the situation was having on his son. But instead of succumbing to despair, he smiled and responded with the promise that he would always come back, that he loved him, and that he was fighting to be with him again. He knew that the answer was more than just words. It was a reaffirmation of the commitment he had made when his son was born, to always be there. These moments, though brief and simple, became the foundation of his motivation. Every gesture of affection, every sincere look, every word exchanged between father and son was confirmation that, despite the legal battles, the love between them was unbreakable. Even with all the difficulties of the process, even with the time apart, the father knew that the love between them would never disappear. Over time, the father began to realize that, despite the emotional distance and the challenges caused by the legal battle, he was slowly regaining his son's trust. During one of the visits, when his son, with a shy smile, began to talk about school, his friends, and even a new toy he had received, the father felt a wave of relief. It was the first time he felt his child trying to share his life with him again, and it brought him immense comfort. He knew that this reconnection was crucial for their future together. Additionally, the father began to use these moments to reinforce the idea that he was there for his son, no matter the circumstances. With each visit, he made it clear that, although the legal battle had affected their lives in unexpected ways, his love and commitment to the child remained unchanged. He wasn't just fighting for the right to be the father. He was fighting to be the father his son deserved. With every small victory, every gesture of affection, the father felt that he was overcoming the distance that had been imposed by the situation. He knew that the road ahead was still long, but he was determined to restore the relationship he had always had with his son, showing him that, despite everything, he was there and would always be there. After months of struggle, frustration, tears, and unimaginable challenges, the battle for custody of his son finally came to its conclusion. The legal process, which seemed endless and exhausting, brought the father something he had not only desired but something he had given his all for: full custody of his son. Upon hearing the judge's words, declaring that the father would now have primary custody, an immense wave of relief washed over his body. But at the same time, an indescribable wave of emotion enveloped him. What seemed like an endless fight had now become the greatest achievement of his life. The courtroom, which once felt like a battlefield, was now immersed in a silence full of meaning. The father, with tears in his eyes, looked at his son. The son, with a shy smile, walked up to him and held his hand. What mattered most in that room were not the words of the judge or the legal documents, but the simple gesture from his son, who had finally understood what it meant to have his father by his side fully. Their fight wasn't just a legal victory. It was a reaffirmation of love, of the strength of an unbreakable bond between father and son. For the father, this victory meant far more than just a judicial decision. It was the conclusion of a difficult journey, but also the beginning of a new era in his life and his son's life. He knew that custody was not the solution to all problems, but it represented the chance to rebuild a relationship of trust, affection, and security. From that moment on, he could finally be the father he had always wanted to be: present, involved, and able to offer his son the home and stability he deserved. But this victory also brought a deep reflection on what really matters. The fight for custody wasn't just about the right to be recognized as a father, but about the ability to fight, not just for oneself, but for a child who depends on you to grow in an environment of love and respect. The true victory wasn't in the hearings or the evidence presented, but in the perseverance, the courage to never give up, and the unconditional love that never broke, even in the hardest of times. The impact of this experience on the father's life was transformative. He not only won a legal battle, but also learned invaluable lessons about resilience, patience, and the importance of never giving up, even when the world seems to turn its back. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but now he had by his side what he had always desired: his son, ready to create new memories, far from the shadows of the dispute and the struggles of the past. The victory was not just his, but theirs, and together, father and son could now move toward a promising future. With mine, custody finally won. The father knew the true mission was just beginning. It was time to build a future together, to show his son what it meant to grow up with the support of both parents, to raise him and love him without limitations. The experience, though painful, had shown him the power of unconditional love and the importance of fighting for what you believe in. He now had the chance to create a new chapter, one where trust, communication, and love would reign, free from the barriers that had once been imposed. Now, more than ever, he understood the value of fatherhood and the impact of being a constant presence in a child's life. He was ready to be the father he had always known he could be, not because the law said he should, but because deep down, he knew his son deserved the best he could offer. And together, they would walk toward a future where love and dedication would be the foundation of everything. If this story touched your heart and inspired you, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support is essential for stories of overcoming, love, and justice like this to continue being shared. Turn on notifications to stay updated on upcoming videos, and don't miss the chance to join us on this journey.